to see all of you tuned in today, the 27th of August, 2025. And we are excited to once again just converge and learn. And team, I can say that we are glad to see many of you joining in. This session is KMLTB accredited, and as a result, it will attract 3 CPD points. So ensure that you've written your correct details, your names, your ID number, your KMLTB registration number, so that for all eligible participants, we can be able to upload for them the CPD points. So today we are excited to share in a very interesting topic. And as you have seen in the poster, today we are talking about risk-based impact prioritization. That is the concept and applicability in your clinical lab setting. So we are excited to today just discuss this very important topic. We just want to understand how risk-based impact prioritization can revolutionize decision-making in the clinical lab settings. And this approach helps to identify, evaluate, and prioritize risks to ensure that our lab processes meet quality, safety, and patient care standards. So it's a very interesting area, and I'm sure that we shall be able to learn together. So we shall invite all questions and any other comments at the end of the presentation. But meanwhile, on the Q&A section, you can go there and write your question so that we can be able to address all questions, concerns at the end of this presentation. So allow me at this point now to welcome everyone on board and to welcome our today's presenter. Our today's presenter is Davis Wekesa. Davis Wekesa holds a bachelor's degree in medical lab science and is an expert in the area of risk-based impact prioritization or in the lab. Davis works for Seba Lancet Kenya, and I'm sure we had done something on risk assessment. And today we just want to continue with the conversation so that all of us can continue to learn and we can continue to share. So Davis, if you can hear me, allow me to invite you at this point to continue and proceed. So Davis, can you hear me? Just confirm and then you can proceed.
Yes, Frederick, I can get you. I can hear you clearly. Am I audible enough?
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I believe we are doing well. I'm privileged once again to be your presenter today on this very interesting topic that we had initially started it last time, but due to time, we could not complete the entire discussion. So, as I've been introduced, my name is Wekesa Davis, and I'm affiliated to Seba Lancet Kenya Limited. The topic of today, the topic of discussion is risk-based impact prioritization. What comes to your mind, you as a technical staff? What comes to your mind, you as a laboratory manager? What comes to your mind, you as that laboratory personnel, when you hear risk-based impact prioritization? Most of you who are business-oriented probably know economies of scale. Most of you who are business-oriented probably you know something called scaling in business. It's all about what do you use as a justification to allocate some resources on a given project A and not given project B. So, at the end of this presentation, you'll have gotten an answer to this question. Given that we usually operate in resource-limited settings, what formula or what procedure do you use to allocate or to prioritize resources to a given project and not to another? That is the question that we are going to answer at the end of this presentation. So risk-based prioritization. Of course, it's a method. One, we apply it in quality management. It can also be applied in laboratory operations. It can also be applied in project planning. And it can also be applied in the ranking of risks, hazards, and improvement opportunities. And what is the basis? What do we base on? We look at what is the likelihood of occurrence. How likely is it to happen? That's number one. Number two, we look at what is the impact? How severe will the consequences be once we allow it to happen? Then number three, which is not commonly used but can also be applied, the detectability process of this risk. That, or under detectability, we are looking at how easily can it be detected before causing harm. I like putting things into context. So assume we are existing in one very beautiful city called Nairobi. In this city, we have very active roads, very busy roads. We can take an example of the Uhuru Highway or the Mombasa Road. Very busy, very active. So imagine we have potholes on Mombasa Road. Potholes on Mombasa Road being a very high-end road and very busy road demands that priority has to be given on those roads. Compare it with a road probably in Ngara, somewhere in the streets of Ngara. Hidden road, less active, not very counterproductive business-wise. The resources allocation to that place will be a bit limited and might take a second chance after we have sorted already what is on Mombasa Road. So in this case of this analogy, the city prioritizes the high-end roads, for example, Mombasa Road, because ignoring them can cause more accidents and can cause high damages. It might consider sorting these other small aspects at a later time. So the fact is, we first focus where the damage is high and where the likelihood is also high, and monitor these other pending aspects of development. So in short, when we talk about risk-based impact prioritization, we are talking of, first, we recognize the risk, we assess the impact of that risk, we assess the likelihood of that risk, then we prioritize a response based on the score that we shall get. And we shall be looking at this process as we understand. So I'm aware my previous speakers have had a discussion about risk and nonconformities, but we cannot avoid discussion of risks when we are talking of risk-based impact prioritization. So let us have a general view of what actually risks are. So understanding of risks in clinical laboratory settings. We talk of risks as events. We talk of risks as conditions. We talk of risks as actions that will actually compromise patient safety, result accuracy, regulatory compliance, and operational efficiency in that dynamic of a lab setting. Of course, we have people who always confuse risks and nonconformities. A risk is different from nonconformities in this sense. One, risk, we are looking at a potential event or condition that may cause harm or deviation if not properly managed. While a nonconformity, we are talking of an actual failure to meet a specific requirement or standard. With risks, we are focusing on future possibilities. It represents what might happen. And risks are usually managed by assessment and mitigation before they actually occur. The impact is always uncertain and could be significant. On the other hand, when you look at nonconformity, we are basing our justification to what is present or what has already happened, what is in the past. These nonconformities actually represent what has already taken place, what has already happened. And nonconformities, unlike risks, nonconformities are actually managed by corrective and preventive actions. The impact is usually confirmed because it has already happened, and nonconformities usually need immediate action. How do we categorize risks in clinical settings? I like looking at things across the phases of testing. Even when it comes to evaluating risks, I look at risks across the phases of testing. The pre-analytical, analytical, and post-analytical phases of testing. So, to me, I categorize issues as the laboratory processes advance. So, number one, we have pre-analytical risks. These are actually, we are looking at risks that occur before the actual testing processes start. And these risks are actually significant and they affect the validity of laboratory results. Of course, they might be around issues of test ordering, patient preparation, sample collection, labeling, handling, and transport. Just to give you an example, I believe these are things that we know, just to emphasize and to bring it out for those ones who might have forgotten. As a reminder, we are talking of an example of a risk as mislabeling of samples, wrong patient sample collection, improper transport, cases of hemolysis, those are risks, cases of incomplete request forms, cases of incorrect container or preservative, for example, using EDTA instead of citrate for coagulation studies, what have you. What is the impact of the pre-analytical risks if not handled? One, they have a potential for false positive or false negative results. It can cause delays in treatment or mismanagement of patients. It can cause an increased cost due to repeat sampling and testing. Of course, in more complex setting, it might be even a medical legal issue. It can cause possible medical legal implications. Then we go to analytical risks. These are risks that actually occur during the actual testing process. This actually covers the moment from the time the sample is loaded onto the analyzer or the testing system until the time when we have a raw result from the analyzer. So these risks are actually directly related to instrument performance, reagent and consumables, operator competency, and adherence to testing protocols. An example or examples to this, that is analyzer malfunctions, mechanical software failure, we are talking of reagent deterioration, we are talking of poor calibrations, we are talking of IQC failure, we are talking of operator errors, and when we talk of operator errors, we are talking of wrong settings, incorrect pipetting, or bypassing some of the procedures in maintenance. We are talking of environmental factors, for example, unstable power supply, temperature fluctuations, or humidity fluctuations that affect the instrument performance. We are talking of carryover or contamination. When you continuously analyze when you continuously analyzing high value samples, is there an implication on the next low value sample? That is what we call the carryover aspect of search. So what are the implications? What impact do these risks actually generate? One, generation of inaccurate, unreliable, and invalid results. If they are not controlled, they lead to generation of inaccurate, unreliable, and invalid results. Number two, there's a potential of misdiagnosis and inappropriate treatment. Of course, nowadays we have what we call evidence-based treatment options. And if you give a wrong result, it directs us to misdiagnosis. Of course, issues such as this will also lead delays in result reporting due to troubleshooting and repeat analysis, and will also lead to increased operational costs due to repeat testing and troubleshooting processes. Then we move to post-analytical risks. These are risks that actually occur after testing process is complete. This happen during result verification, reporting, interpretation, and communication to clinicians or patients. These risks can directly affect timely clinical decisions making and patient management. Some examples to this level, we have incorrect result entry. And here we are referring to transcription errors when manually entering results into the LIS or reports. We have a risk of delayed reporting, backlogs in verification or transmission of results. This actually translates to treatment delays. Of course, we have a risk of failure to communicate critical values or results to clinicians or management team. Of course, we have an aspect that urgent life-threatening results must be communicated to the clinical team, and if they're not communicated, of course, that is a risk. Report formatting errors, incorrect units on reports, missing reference ranges, or unclear result presentation. Loss or corruption of data, where we have LIS crashing, data storage errors, or accidental deletion of results from the system. Failure to review abnormal results. We are talking of releasing results without evaluating clinical plausibility. Inadequate documentation, missing records of communication, or amended reports or corrections not effectively done. What is the impact of this? It leads to delayed or inappropriate clinical intervention to patients. Number two, it leads to potential patient harm due to missed or late clinical or critical value communication. Of course, it also leads to loss of clinician confidence in laboratory services. In more complex situations, it leads to legal and reputational risks for the laboratory. Of course, we have operational risks. These are risks related to laboratories' infrastructure, resources, and operational capabilities. And these can directly or indirectly disrupt testing processes and service delivery. These risks often affect multiple stages of testing. Operational risks actually cut across pre-analytical, analytical, and post-analytical. Example of an operational risk: power outages. Of course, a power outage will directly impact on analyzer operation. It will directly impact on reagent preservation. We look at LIS downtime. You are used to operating with a laboratory management information system, but today it's down. It's not functioning optimally. This actually translates to delays in results entry. It translates to delays in retrieval of results. Of course, it translates to delays in communication of very critical results to our clinician or clinical team for management of the patient. We also look at reagent or consumable stockouts as an operational risk. Of course, when we have reagent and consumables stockouts, It leads direct to inability to perform other tests, leading to extended turnaround times for these clients. And extended turnaround times means there are significant delays in management of the patient. Operational risk, number 4, is inadequate staffing. Of course, it leads to reduced capacity to meet turnaround times, increased error rates due to overworking or multitasking. Equipment breakdowns, prolonged analyzer downtime due to delayed maintenance of repairs directly impacts on our results. Insufficient workspace, overcrowding, workflow disruption. Of course, this directly leads to increased contamination risk. Poor environmental conditions, failure to meet temperature or humidity specifications. This directly affects sample integrity and analyzer performance. So what are the impacts of operational risks? Service disruption or delayed patient care, that is an automatic, direct, end-to-end impact. Of course, operational risks might directly increase the turnaround time and backlog of samples. It can also lead to reputational damage due to perceived unreliability of our testing services. It also leads to financial losses from repeat testing, wasted reagents, and client dissatisfaction. And on a higher end, that is a potential non-compliance to accreditation requirements, even to GCLP requirements, even to your local facility-based requirements as such operational requirements. Number E, we have regulatory or compliance risks. Of course, these are risks arising from failure to adhere to accreditation, certification, or legal regulatory requirements, which this in turn directly leads to loss of accreditation, legal penalties, or suspension of operations. Some of those, some examples of regulatory or compliance risks is non-conformance with ISO 15189 requirements for quality management and competency and impartiality. That is a very significant risk that has to be handled. If it's not handled, it might result to the consequences aforementioned above. Of course, we have GCLP documentation gaps. The GCLP standards directly depict on what and how documentation should be done. But if we have gaps in our documentation, incomplete documentation, inaccurate records, missing records, that is a very significant GCLP documentation gap. Of course, safety violations, we have OSHA standards. OSHA standards is the principal guideline for all operational health and safety operational standards. But if we do not comply with the OSHA standards, that is a safety violation, and it's a very big risk as such. Of course, we have ethical and legal breaches, unauthorized result release, breach of patient confidentiality. That is a regulatory and compliance risk, and it has to be reevaluated. Of course, licenses lapsing, operating with a lapsed license, of course, expired facility licenses, expired personnel licenses, expired analyzer licenses. That is a direct risk that has to be evaluated and checked. So failure to participate in mandatory EQA schemes as required by the standard, that is a risk that has to be checked and evaluated as appropriate. Inadequate staff training, not meeting competency requirements and regulatory standards, and you allow that staff to actually participate in running of patient samples, that is a very significant risk and has to be evaluated and the impact assessed. So what is the impact? What are the potential impacts of regulatory risks? Number one, loss of accreditation for those who are accredited, or inability to operate. Of course, you might come across regulatory sanctions or fines from health authorities. Number three, there's a direct reputational harm. or erosion of client trust. A client cannot trust a facility that does not comply. Of course, suspension or closure of laboratory operations, that is a very significant impact that might accompany and manage, improperly managed risk related to regulatory. Of course, there's legal liability in case of harm to patients for non-compliance. We have biosafety, biosecurity risks. These are risks to staff, patients, and the general public arising from accidental exposure to infectious agents, hazardous materials, or deliberate exposure of biological resources. Examples of this, we are talking of needle stick injuries during sample collection or processing. That is a risk. We must look at it effectively and manage it actionably. Pathogen release from improper handling or containment failure and spillages, that is a very significant risk that has to be evaluated and actioned as. Improper waste disposal for biohazard materials leading to environmental contamination, that is a significant impact that has to be checked and reevaluated as appropriate. Of course, another risk is laboratory-acquired infections from poor adherence to biosafety protocols. That is a risk. It has to be checked and evaluated as appropriate. Poor biosafety cabinet practices, compromising containment, and finally, inadequate access to control, inadequate access control to sensitive laboratory areas. That is a significant risk and has to be checked. So what are the impacts? Risk of infection or disease transmission to staff, patients, and of course the extended environment. Legal liabilities and penalties for non-compliance to biosafety and biosecurity regulations. Damage to institutional reputation and loss of trust. And finally, potential suspension of operations by regulatory authorities. This has been seen and has been reported. Human factor risks, of course, these are risks arising from human error, fatigue, misjudgment, inadequate training or skill deficit that compromise testing accuracy, safety, and efficiency of our laboratory personnel. And examples of these risks are incorrect pipetting leading to inaccurate test results, misinterpretation of results, or failure to recognize abnormal values, failure to follow SOPs. You have an SOP in place, but you cannot follow it. Of course, that is a risk. Quality control protocols in place, you cannot follow that. That is a very significant risk. Fatigue-related errors due to extended shifts or poor rostering, of course, that is a very significant risk. And this it directly leads to overworking. And when you overwork, it has a direct implication on your productivity. Data entry errors when transcribing results, of course, that has to be noted and acknowledged as a significant risk. Inadequate training or insufficient competency assessment. When we have insufficient competency evaluation, it leaves us with gaps that, if not addressed, they create a very significant risk for that. So what are the impacts of this? Human error risks, they directly lead to inaccurate results, leading to misdiagnosis. It leads to increased repeat testing or cost wastage. Of course, it has a direct impact on productivity. It increases the cost of production. Lab is production. So when we have repeat testing, it has a direct impact on production. Loss of accreditation if errors compromise quality systems. Of course, that is an obvious aspect. Reduced staff morale due to repeated errors and corrective actions. Of course, it goes without saying. Potential harm to patients from clinical mismanagement. That is a direct end-to-end impact of that. So what are the sources of risks? What are the sources of risks? Equipment related. Of course, risk can be equipment related, and we are talking of the aging analyzers. lack of PPM, that is planned preventive maintenance, and inadequate backup systems. Those actually come together to form what we call equipment-related risks. Process-related risks, we are talking of, do we have SOPs? Yes, we have an SOP, but these SOPs, are they being adhered to? So that constitutes what we call weak SOP adherence. We have SOPs, but we are not adhering to that SOP. We have poor sample tracking systems in place. There's no consistency, there's no reliability, or there's no reproducibility in our tracking system. They're inconsistent. Then we are also talking of inconsistent IQC or quality control. Inconsistent quality control. We have the protocols of quality control, but we do not consistently adhere to the directives of those quality control. Of course, we have material-related risks. These directly refer to expired reagents, improper shortage, and reliable suppliers. You have suppliers who do not meet the end of the bargain, or they supply low standard things that you did not agree upon. That falls under material related. Of course, environmental risks. These are directly related to temperature, unstable temperature, humidity, and contamination levels in the environment. Then we have another source of risk as organizational risks. Poor communication. Poor communication, both vertical and horizontal communication between you as colleagues and you as staffs to your management. Poor. Of course, we have an aspect of bureaucratic decision-making delays, bureaucracy. Before something is implemented, it has to go through chains and chains and chains, wasting time. At the end of the day, the risk grows as it happens. Inadequate staffing, staff shortages is a direct risk source as such. Potential impacts of unmanaged risks, of course, patient harm, delayed or wrong diagnosis, inappropriate treatments, loss of credibility as a lab, loss of credibility as a facility, as a hospital. It reduces the trust even the clinical team has in your results. Of course, there's a financial loss or increased productivity, production costs. Of course, repeat testing directly increases the production cost. Of course, in serious, well-defined environments, we might even have litigation issues, and you lose those clients, okay? Another impact is regulatory sanctions. You'll be sanctioned, you lose your accreditation, there will be penalties on top of everything. So that's why whenever we identify risks, we must manage them as appropriate. So, coming back to risk-based impact prioritization, we defined what risk-based impact prioritization was. We have gone ahead and looked at the categories of risks. We have gone ahead and looked at what are the potential sources of risk. We have gone ahead and looked at what are the potential impact, direct impact consequences of having unmanaged risks. So we go back to how then do we apply this in our setting? And this is the procedure. Number one, we identify risks or issues. I've just given an example, an overview of potential risks across our testing processes. So we are told that identify the risks. And how do you identify these risks? List all potential problems, non-conformances, or hazards. List all of them. And this is I'm calling it a multi-staff responsibility. It's not a responsibility that is directly linked to only one staff. No, you cannot as an individual highlight or list all the potential problems in your lab. This has to be done holistically. And the only available holistic approach is when each and every staff actually contributes to this. So once you have identified all these potential problems, clearly define them. Clearly give specific problems, specific hazards, and specific non-conformances. Create a specific non-conformance that needs an actual attention as such. Number two, after we have clearly defined the specific problems, just for clarity purposes, once, for example, I've identified a potential problem, like for example, my analyzer is old. My analyzer is old, for example, that is a problem that I've identified. Go further and clearly define what is the potential problem that can actually arise from an old analyzer. Have it clearly documented for such. Then number two, assess the impact of the problem that you have defined up there. And how do we assess the impact? Assign a score, 1 to 5, or you can decide 1 to 10, depending on what you want to use. And this impact, this score, should actually be based on the effect on patient safety, result quality, turnaround time, or regulatory compliance. So under this, we look at this way. Determine the potential effect of this risk. And how do you determine the potential effect? Consider how the risk will affect the following. Patient safety. What harm does this risk have to the patient? That is the question that you should ask yourself. Number two, what harm or what is the consequence on the result quality? Does it affect the accuracy of your result? Does it affect the reliability of your result? Number three, look at it this way. What is the direct impact on the turnaround time of my services? Does it directly impact on the turnaround time or no? Then look at it in this manner. What is the impact on regulatory compliance? What is the impact? Scale these impacts on a scale of 1 or 0 to 5, or 1 to 10, 1 to 5, or 1 to 10, depending on what you want. But the most realistic scale is actually 1 to 5. For example, an example is on the indicated severity score. We use a predefined scale where, for example, 1 is negligible, minimal impact. It does not have an impact on patient quality, or on patient safety. It does not have an impact on result quality. It does not have a regulatory impact. That one, you assign it as 1. 2, for minor, there is a slight impact or minor delays or errors, both on patient safety, results, regulatory compliance. Number 3 is moderate. Of course, the impact is noticeable. There is a moderate impact, and it directly relates to noticeable delays, errors, or minor compliance. Number 4, it's major. This has serious delays, compromised safety, and there's a very significant risk of non-compliance, regulatory non-compliance. Then number 5 is critical, severe harm. invalid results, regulatory penalties. Then you document the rationale that you used. Record the reason for the chosen severity score, linking it to the specific consequence. And the reasons as above. Why did you decide that it's a 1? Give a reason. Why did you decide that it's a 2? A severity score of 2? Give a reason. Why did you decide that it's a severity score of 3? Give a reason. Why did you decide that it's a severity score of 4 or 5? You give your reasons as to that. Because, ladies and gentlemen, where we operate from, without documentation, everything is invalid. Then we assess the likelihood. Also in the likelihood, we are giving it on a Likert scale of 1 to 5, where 1 is rare. Risk is highly unlikely to occur. Maybe you have a risk that you project that can happen once, potentially happen once in 10 years. That is a rare risk, okay? So it can be categorized as 1. A 2 for unlikely risk occurrence. The risk may occur occasionally, but not expected frequently, okay? A 3, it's possible. The risk could occur sometimes under certain conditions. A 4 is very likely, The risk is expected to occur frequently. The risk is expected to occur frequently. Then number 5, you are almost certain. You are almost certain. This risk occurs almost all the time, very regularly. You do not always miss this risk. It occurs every now and then. So, of course, just like as we were assessing severity, we must always explain the basis for the assigned likelihood score, considering controls and historical data. We must have justifications for the reasons or the basis as to why we are assigning this score. So, what follows is to calculate what is called risk priority number. Risk priority number. We are multiplying the impact times the likelihood. I said we are using the Likert score of 1 to 5 for impact, and likelihood we are also using a Likert score of 1 to 5. Depending on what you have chosen, let us say you rated that impact as 3 and the likelihood as 4, you multiply this 3 times 4, it gives you a 12. That gives you an risk priority number, RPN. In some other cases, we also factor in detectability. Of course, if we are factoring in detectability, we are also using a Likert score and we are scoring it from 1 to 5. And there must be justifications as to why you are using that. You are assigning given score to a given aspect. So, in example 1, you just multiply impact times likelihood directly, you get your 12. Or you can as well involve detectability in it to make it impact times likelihood times detectability. It gives you a score. So once you have your scores for the problems that you have identified, you then rank the risks. And when we are ranking these risks, the risk with the highest RPN, the risk priority number, is given the highest priority when it comes to mitigation. Okay? The higher the RPN, the higher the mitigation index. What has the highest? Of course, if If a risk has the highest impact, let us say 5, and the highest likelihood of occurrence, which is 5, it will give you a maximum score of 25. That is the highest you can get. So if it gives you the higher the RPN, the higher the priority for mitigation. Okay? So that is actually what should get priority when you are assigning your resources. When you are deciding to choose what comes first and what comes second, you choose, you actually handle what has the highest RPN as you monitor those ones with the low or insignificant RPNs as such. So of course, at number 6, we always have to plan controls, apply corrective preventive measures starting from the highest RPN to the lowest RPN. And I'll insist this tool is actually used to prioritize what has the highest impact and the likelihood of occurrence. But it does not mean that you forget about those that have the lowest. It only tells you, yes, begin with this, it has the highest, but also monitor these. Once resources are available, you can sort it out. Of course, at number 7, we have to review and update, periodically reassess risks to reflect changes in processes or controls. So, why does this procedure matter? Why does risk-based impact prioritization matter? One, it focuses resources on the most critical risks first. What has the highest impact will automatically get the highest resources allocated to that. It takes priority, it takes precedence over that. So that is something that we cannot run away from, and it has to be focused in that area. Number 2, it supports regulatory compliance, where risk management, of course, regulatory compliance, that is GCLP and 15189, where risk management is mandatory. Risks in lab settings, whether you are ISO or not, must be identified and must be actioned as appropriate. Of course, since it's risk-based, it gives priority to patient safety. Of course, it enhances patient safety by tackling high impact, high likelihood risks quickly. Once you tackle those, you have enhanced patient safety. Then finally, of course, it gives or provides an objective, a documented, objectivized basis for decision making. Because if somebody walked into your lab today and asked you, what basis do you use to justify that this aspect of lab needs priority over this one? What aspect do you use to justify that you need a new analyzer as urgently as possible? Resources should be allocated to getting a new analyzer as urgently as possible, compared to setting up a cabinet in the lab. There must be a justification to that. And this is a tool that you can actually apply when giving such justifications to your management as such. And you have to document it, of course. It has to be like an SOP, because it has to be a guidance point. There must be standardization in your procedures. Let not one person in your facility use it, and in the same lab, there's another person who is not actually utilizing it. It has to be standardized as such. Of course, applicability of that, we have already mentioned it. It's directly applicable in risk management, identifying potential errors. And once you have identified potential errors, it can actually be used in prioritizing risks that have to be handled urgently and those ones that have to be monitored as we wait for resources. As such, of course, it can also be employed in nonconformity management. In nonconformity, these are nonconformities that have already happened, issues that have already taken place. They were not managed, so they have taken place. And in this case, you might have so many nonconformities in the lab. But then, since we operate in resource-limited settings, what do you start with? Actually, this tool can also be employed in such like settings. as such. What is an integrated approach? An integrated approach is we are looking at using risk assessment to reduce the frequency of non-conformance. You see, risks and managed risks actually translate to non-conformances. That is a take-home point. When you do not manage a risk, it directly translates to a non-conformity. So an integrated approach we are looking at, how then do we use this risk-based impact assessment to control the non-conformity index? So we assess our risks, we solve them before they translate into non-conformities. Actually, that is what this integrated approach is about. Of course, just like any other tool, it also has its own limitations. And number one limitations, this one greatly relies on accurate data and staff experience. Of course, uncertain. You know, we have some risks that are not so common. And we have some risks that are on the margin, that emerging. So they might be missed by staff during the documentation process or identification process. And once we identify, we miss it during the identification, it means we will miss it out during implementation. Number two, it's subjective because it's you and me who are scoring it. What if I score it as a 5, but somebody else scores it at 3? It's subjective. And how do we then manage this? We have said there must be a reason as to why you are given a certain score to a given aspect. So subjectivity in scoring impact and likelihood can lead to inconsistencies in prioritization. That is something that has to be factored in. Of course, we have said that risks have not happened. So once we identify a risk, it means we must institute preventive measures, preventive or mitigatory measures in place. And sometimes some of these mitigatory measures might not be very appropriate, okay? So they might not fully eliminate all risks, especially the complex ones. It might not fully eliminate the risks. So we have the risk reoccurring, okay? So yes, the tool is good, but yes, we might identify the risk, we sort it out, we give it much priority, but you find that we might not eliminate it in its entirety. Continuous monitoring and updating risk profile. Risk identification as a procedure, as a process, is a continuous process. Therefore, it can't be broken down as such. It has to be continuous. Of course, it also has limitations when it comes to non-conformity management. Detection depends on effective monitoring systems. Some of these non-conformities might go unmissed. And when it comes to identification of non-conformity, it goes with the staff training and the competency. Are your staff trained in identification of non-conformities? Okay. Corrective actions may be delayed due to resource constraints. I've said we are prioritizing those that have the highest likelihood and the highest impact, and monitoring those ones that have the low impact and low likelihood. But it does not mean that we overlook them. They have to be handled eventually as such. Recurrence of non-conformities can happen if the root cause was not directly identified and actioned. The root cause. We identified other causes, supporting causes, and we did not deal with the root cause. So it causes reoccurrence of such like issues. Documentation and reporting may be incomplete and inconsistent, affecting quality improvement efforts. Of course, I've said it depends with the staff competency who are actually handling these responsibilities. So if they cannot be documented appropriately, comprehensively, it means some of these things will be inconsistent and may not be handled appropriately. So general limitations of the tool: balancing thorough risk and non-conformity management. with, of course, workflow management or workload can be very challenging. Very challenging. We have one staff in the lab. This staff is actually supposed to deliver results to the patient. But at the same time, this staff is supposed to do risk management and nonconformity management. If you do not have sufficient staff, it's actually a lot and overwhelming, and this might actually lead to some of these aspects being overlooked as such. Of course, ladies and gentlemen, it goes without saying, we are human, and human in most cases get resistant to change. Change must be, you must prepare your staff for change. That is something you can't run away from. Change cannot be implored on people. Change cannot be forced on people. Change management is a process. You must prepare your staff for change. You must actually train your staff for change. And you must actually communicate well. Both, I mentioned this when I was talking about both horizontal and vertical communications. They must be perfect. You must prepare your staff for change. If they are not prepared well, it has a direct impact on these tools, because resistance to change, some of these things will not be undertaken. Those risks will not be identified. They will not be monitored. Those non-conformances will not be identified. They will not be monitored. And that will be a failure at our end. And with that, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I believe through that presentation, we have answered the question. And my question was, what justification do you have as a lab? What justification do you have as a healthcare facility to prioritize resources on one given aspect and not the other? Thank you, colleagues. Thank you for the platform, LMSK, and I rest my case there. Frederick, back to you. Frederick?
Okay, as Fred prepares to come in, thank you very much, Davis, for this wonderful presentation. It's actually encouraging, and quite a number of people here, our attendees, have really appreciated this presentation. Yes, Irene Rob is saying nice presentation. Quite a number. Irene Tairu, wonderful presentation. Paul Kipchumba is actually saying it's a very nice and elaborate presentation, and is appreciating you and saying thanks, Davis. So in this regard, I may not read each and every comment, but it's also wonderful that there are several questions, and we also encourage everyone to, not everyone, but those who are having any question, to use our Q&A. Just type your question. We'll read them out to our presenter, and you'll get more clarifications. So keep using the Q&A. There's some quite, there's some attendees who used our chat section to ask some questions. I would advise that you use our Q&A section. For example, Alfred Muia, let me just read it. It's from the chat section. What is the measure of minor, noticeable, and status delays to qualify scale of 2, 3, and 4, respectively? So, Davis, this is the question. What is the measure of minor, noticeable, and serious delays to qualify scale of 2, 3, and 4, respectively? Over to you.
Okay, thank you, George. when I was looking at assessment of the impact and the likelihood of occurrence, there are one or two things I mentioned. One, with regard to severity, we are using a Likert scale of 1 to 5, where 1 is actually negligible. Minimum impact, it directly translates to minimum impact. Where 2 infers to minor, there is a slight impact. Like, for example, minor delays. You have a TAT for malaria as 40 or 45 minutes, but then your systems have generated a TAT and a delayed TAT. You have gone to 50 minutes. That is a minor error or such. Number 3, moderate. Yes, it's noticeable. It's noticeable delay or error or a minor non-compliance. It's moderate. Then 4 for major, serious delays as such. Then 5 critical. The same thing applies to the likelihood. Where 1 is rare, something has not happened for the last 10 days. That is a rare, for the last 10 years. You have not come across or experienced such for the last 10 years. Or it has happened once in 10 years. That is very rare. That can be assigned as 1. For 2, very unlikely. It may occur occasionally, but not expected frequently. Number 3, it has a possible occurrence. Risk will occur sometimes under certain conditions. 4, likely. The risk is expected to occur very frequently. Then almost certain for 5 is something that you cannot avoid. You'll always come across it. Okay? So, to answer your question, my brother, the scale is as indicated. Then it calls upon you as a staff in that lab to then now enhance this scale further. When you give 1 as rare, yes, I've given an example, risk is likely and very unlikely to occur, or it has occurred once in 10 years. You must give a reason. You must have a backing. And the backing that I've given is actually what is in those brackets. Okay? I believe my brother on the other end is answered.
That's great. Thank you very much for that. I hope the answer has sunk well, and Alfred has got the bits that maybe he was looking for. And I think you have just exhausted it, because the second part of the question was that what is the measure of categorizing the likelihood in the given scales of 1 to 5? I think you've also answered that. So you're switching gears to our Q&A section, and I'd like to invite now Frederick to proceed. So if you can hear me, Frederick, kindly pick the mic.
Thank you. I think we are proceeding well, and I'll just bring in a question from Wilfred Aria, and he's asking, what if fixing a serious risk is financially impossible? I don't know what you can say to that, but I can add this also. And then what if regulators flag something as high risk, but it has very little clinical impact? So maybe, David, you can have something to say about that.
So thank you, Fred, and thank you for whoever has raised that question. This tool does not have a limited operation only in the lab, because for you to actually base on this tool, it must also be actually discussed by the decision makers, the financial makers, the financial providers. So when a case has a serious impact on care, if I got it well. If it has a serious impact on care, I assume this thing has a high impact and it has a high likelihood of occurrence. So this has to be discussed vividly with the management, the financial decision makers. Because once the thing has been flagged, once it has been flagged as high impact and high likelihood of occurrence, financial impossibility does not become in as a factor, because it means it has to be sorted there and then, regardless of what. You better suspend every other operation, but have this sorted. That is how this tool actually works, because you have officially integrated it into your systems. It's officially integrated it into your standard operating procedures. So if it says that, yes, this has a direct impact on patient safety is unnegotiable. For those of us who have read ISO 15189, patient safety is unnegotiable. Even if it has high financial implication, it has to be sorted there and then. So when it comes to discussion of this tool, it has also to bring in the senior management, because there are some high level decisions such as these ones that have to be implored upon. Frederick, there's that second question. I did not get clearly the second bit.
For sure. I think it was asking,
Yes.
what if regulators flag something as high risk, but
Yes.
it has little clinical impact?
High risk, but has little clinical impact. Let me try and think of something of that kind. What can we flag as high risk? I've said here clearly, for you to flag something as high risk, it must have a very high impact. And when we are talking of an impact, unless whoever asked the question actually gives some clarity on it, we are talking of what impact does it have? Does it have impact on patient care, patient safety? Does it have impact on results of that patient, of a patient? Does it have a direct impact on regulatory compliance? Okay, so if it does have a direct impact, be it not on patient safety and clinical care of the patient, but it has a high risk on regulatory compliance, it has to be handled. The basis here is high risk. As long as it has been flagged as high risk and it has the highest likelihood of occurrence, whether it has a direct impact on patient outcome or not, it might have an impact on regulatory compliance. So it must be sorted there and then. Thank you.
Thank you for that, David. Actually, I think there was more explanation to that, and I think he was saying the regulatory expectation, for example, accreditation bodies like ISO 15189 or CAP may flag a slight excursion in the refrigerator temperature, say, positive 8.2 degrees Celsius instead of the required 2 to 8 degrees Celsius as high risk non-conformity, since reagents and samples must be stored under strict conditions. So the real clinical impact of this is that if the deviation lasted only 15 minutes during a power switchover and reagents were stable as proven by the manufacturer's stability data, then patient safety was not truly compromised. I think that is a bit of the explanation that he was giving to that.
Yeah.
Very well. So I believe we are proceeding well. And in case you want to make verbal comments or you want to speak, you can raise your hand. And also I will be able to unmute you so that you speak. So I can see a few hands are up. Philip Songol and Dorcas Kimanzi. I'm hoping your background is clear, and I'm now allowing you to talk. You can unmute Philip Songol and make your comment. Philip. So if you want to speak, you can just raise your hand, but ensure you work on your background noise. So Philip, if you can hear me, you can unmute and make your comments, or you can bring in your question. Philip? Okay. Dorcas Kimanzi, I'm allowing you a minute to unmute your mic, and also you can make your comments. Dorcas, if you can hear me, you can see your hand is raised. Okay. So I don't know if you want to make your comment, or you want to ask a question. You are free to just raise your hand. I will be able to unmute you, and then once I do that, just save on time. Ensure you just unmute and make your comment or ask your question. So if there's any one of that nature, kindly, you just be free to raise your hand. Otherwise, I think we are proceeding well, and many of you are really appreciative of the presentation. Jafet Sowek, thank you for your comments. You are saying this was very informative and impressive presentation. Thank you so much, Jafet. And all of you who are also appreciating the presentation. So we are in the Q&A section, and we are proceeding on to discuss what we were just learning together. And maybe if you have any question, just type it in the Q&A section, so that I will be able to read it, and we shall be able to respond or react to your thoughts or your questions. Beth Gideon is asking a question. Explain how analyzer license operates and its origin. David, I don't know whether you had that.
Analyzer license?
Operates.
Operates.
Yes.
Thank you for that. So analyzer license. Once a supplier gives you a machine, okay? Once a supplier gives you a machine, that machine comes with some specifications. One, the analyzer is under contract with this supplier for servicing. That's number one. Number two, analyzer license might apply in the sense that a license of analyzer gives a lifespan duration to that analyzer. For example, we have analyzers that have been pulled out of the market, right? Or analyzers that their operational durability was 20 years. But your analyzer is 25 years or 21 years. So in this case, analyzers operating beyond the manufacturer or supplier specified operationability is what we refer to as an invalidated analyzer license. Like what has been put out as an operational aspect for that analyzer has been, you have gone overboard of it. So in the event that this thing does not actually give credible outcome, the supplier of that analyzer or the analyzer in its context cannot be queried, or you cannot justify because, hey, I told you this analyzer can only function, has a lifespan of 20 years, okay? Operational capability is 20 years. You have gone ahead and used it on ABCT beyond the operationalization license. That is the context of the analyzer license as such.
Yeah, very well, David. That is very well. That is very well handled. Thank you, Beth Gideon, for that question. And maybe as we are proceeding, we continue to appreciate your concerns, your questions, and your comments. So I'll read this from okay. This is from Martin Jogona. Going to environmental sources, risk. Okay. Can we include noise arising from the construction site, i.e. quarry? David?
Of course, yes, that is a direct risk. So it's us as the lab to factor in ways of how then do we control, okay? Because you cannot stop constructions you cannot stop constructions happening. So the aspect of unmanaged noise now, unmanaged, that is actually what raises a risk. But we as a lab, we as business operations, we must then look at a way of how do we then control the impact of the noise as such, either us as a facility or directly in correlation with whoever is actually doing the construction, so that we find a give and take way of how to moderate the impact that is being arisen. Of course, it's true, and environmental risks as a source of risk, noise pollution comes in too.
Thank you so much. Otherwise, participants, I think it is a very wonderful presentation, and for that we will continue to have even in the days to come. And I think we have come to the tail end of today's presentation. And maybe I just want to appreciate everyone who found time. I have seen your comments and thoughts. Deborah Mogi saying educative presentation. Jane Kaburu, timely, very educative. Tyson, good presentation. Caesar, very educative presentation. And all of you for the compliment. So at this time, I want to take this back to the presenter to say his closing words. Welcome, David.
Thank you, Fred, once again for this opportunity. I believe I'm audible enough.
Yes, you are.
Okay, my take-home point is this, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Risk-based impact assessment or impact prioritization as a tool is a very realistic tool. But you cannot use it until it's actually part of your processes. For you to utilize it, it must be documented as one of your SOPs. You must then train your staffs or your colleagues on it as a tool of usability. Then you must also evaluate the competency of the staff that will actually be assigned the responsibility of using this tool. It's a very effective tool. It can help you to justify some of these issues that we are always grappling with. Expenditure, expenditure, expenditure. What do we prioritize over the other? We must have a scientific backing or a scientific basis on that question. Thank you. It's always a pleasure to be on this other side of the mic. And I presume today you have taken 1 or 2 points for implementation. Thank you.
Thanks so much, David. I want to take this opportunity on behalf of Lab Medicine Society of Kenya to say thank you for this wonderful and very educative presentation, excellently done. And I think we have received quite overwhelming responses and comments from our participants. And once again, on behalf of Lab Medicine Society of Kenya, to all our participants, thank you for finding time to always join into our CMEs. And we hope that together we shall capacity build ourselves to improve on the various areas or the various thematic areas in the lab. And if you have any suggestions, any areas you'd want us to look at, kindly, our email lines are always open, our phone numbers are open. Kindly, you can drop a call or you can write to us an email on any thematic area you feel or you may want to be considered for our weekly webinar. Otherwise, it was a pleasure having you. Until next time, thank you so much and enjoy the rest of the week.